Hello and welcome to Educational. I'm your host, Roy.
I'm Terry.
So we are the podcast that we are chronicling my aging through journey, my journey through aging. Of course, Terry is timeless and hasn't aged a day in the last 10 years.
Aww.
But anyway, and also our parents, both of our parents, are at that point where we're needing more help and having to make decisions. So that was why we started the show. We want to talk about our journey, but also we bring on professionals and guests from time to time. Today we have an exciting guest, and I'm going to let Terry introduce Benjamin.
Ben Kintisch is a cantor, a chaplain, and a music teacher when he's not on stage. This is the first musical that he's created called Life Review, the Hospice musical. He's loved singing and performing since early elementary school, and the journey from hospice chaplaincy to songwriting to musical theater stage has been an amazing inspiration. Life Review, the hospice musical, it's a new musical celebrating life, love, and loss through 3 seasons at a residential hospital. The story follows the young Rabbi David, the new chaplain at the facility. He arrives in autumn, eager and naive, caring but lonely. As he ministers to the patients, Rabbi David learns from his patients even as he cares for them and their loved ones. Ben, thank you so much for being on the show. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Terry, for the lovely introduction. And Roy, I love how you didn't even skip a beat when you had your senior moment during your introduction about
That's right.
podcasts
That's
for senior. Right. I just smiled. You smiled.
Yeah, we got to put it all out there, right?
Folks, it's 100% real on Educational.
That's right. That's right.
I'm so excited to be with you and all of your listeners.
I just like to hear him say that I'm not aging at all.
Yes, I know some of you are listening and some of you are watching. So those of you who are watching saw me give the
right. That's right.
thumbs up, like, nice move, dude.
Right.
She's not within arm's length, but she could still hit me if she threw something.
That's right.
It's nice to be. I always tell people it's a good idea to be nice to your loved ones, especially if you cohabitate.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Well, we've been excited about this for quite some time. I think I stumbled across the review on Instagram, and when I was telling Terry about it, it was just both of us have been so excited, and then, it's taken us a while to get this date. So we thank you for staying with us, being persistent, getting on here, and we are looking so forward because it's a tough time in life for the individual going through the hospice, and then also for their family. And I think that's kind of twofold with this episode. It's not only going to be very entertaining with you talking about your journey, how you got here in the musical, and the behind the scenes of the musical, but also performing a couple tunes from the musical itself, and then just that lesson of how we can kind of tie all this together to maybe make somebody's life a little bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely, Roy. You summed it up beautifully. This is a time, this pandemic time, of tremendous loss and tremendous grief. Yeah. Related to this pandemic specifically, we've seen a startling amount of deaths, especially among those 65 and older. Let's just name it, right?
Right.
So if you are an older person, statistically speaking, you've been touched by COVID, or someone you know has, right, or at the very least a neighbor or friend or coworker. And if you're lucky enough to not have had an actual loss like a mortality in your network of friends and family, maybe you've suffered losses related to the whole world shutting down. Right. I was laughing with Roy and Terry before we started taping about how I'm a middle school teacher. So I'm doing this strange thing of teaching hybrid learning through a computer screen. And so there are kids all across America, around the world, whose school year has been canceled or changed. Right. Now, that's not as heartbreaking, perhaps, as losing a loved one, like someone dying, but that's a grief, right? I worked with some teens at my synagogue who were like the drama kids, and they were excited for senior year when they would finally get their chance to be a star. Musical was canceled last spring.
Yeah.
So, and I can relate because my project, as we will discuss, has hit some peaks and valleys, and the valleys are mostly COVID related, but we all have our grief right now for those we've lost, the experiences we've lost, the places we can't go to. And so the theme of grief, which is so huge in this musical project, is very much of the moment. And as you said, I hope to be able to help people move through that grief journey, whatever that grief journey is for them.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Why don't you tell us first off, I know you have a lot of experience in the hospice sector. That's kind of where Life Review came out of. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, how you found yourself here?
Do you mean how did I write a musical about hospice, or how did I find Roy and Terry?
Yeah, well, no, yeah. Well, you could tell that story. That's an interesting. No, I just meant your experience of your life prior to the musical and kind of what led up into the musical itself.
Okay, so I'll try my best. I'm trying to make this very long story shorter.
Okay.
Because it's been approximately 6 years. So if I don't compress the story, you're going to have a hard time with the bandwidth and the length of the interview. Yeah. So the musical began with songs. The songs began with stories. The stories were mostly inspired by real-life experiences I had as a beginner chaplain, visiting patients and their loved ones in a residential hospice. It was my first year of being a chaplain, so that part is from the play is semi-autobiographical, to be sure. Though in real life I'm a Cantor, the character is a rabbi. But the idea of being new at a job in general we can all relate to, but for me the specific story was being a new hospice chaplain.
Wow.
So there's this thing in hospice called Life Review. It's a term that I borrowed from the clinical world to use as the name of the play. And what it is you sit down with someone and you ask them questions that encourage them to tell the story of their life. And I think I'll probably sing that song when we're ready for it because it's the title track of the show. And it's kind of an interesting moment for the audience because they can kind of experience what's it like to visit with a chaplain and tell their story. Anyway, these stories, these Life Review stories that happened bedside were so moving to me. One night I called my wife and I said, honey, these stories are amazing. I think they want to be songs. She replied without missing a beat, get writing. And that night I started writing in one of these old black and white journal books. Mm-hmm. And that became the first ballad for the show, Will It Still Snow When I'm Gone?
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, and that must have been like being thrown off in the deep end to kind of have that as your first assignment. I mean, because it's just, for most, it's emotionally draining. And I just, I don't know, it's kind of like welcome to priesthood, I guess.
Yes, you are correct that out of all of the choices one could pick for chaplaincy, for first-year training, hospice is a particularly intense choice. Yeah. Though one could say the same is true for a lot of other chaplain jobs. I mean, there are chaplains who do their first year in military service. Uh-huh. There's some who do ER, hospital, wings. I mean, like, there are very few chaplain jobs that don't involve a whole lot of heartbreak because the chaplain's job, for those of you listening, if you didn't know, chaplain's job is a person of faith who ministers to the sick, seriously injured, ill, dying, and their loved ones. Or more broadly, people dealing with real-life struggle, and they want help from a faith professional, right? That's what a clergy person is. Most folks who are approximately your generation or a bit older, they discovered what a chaplain is from watching MASH. So the young priest on MASH,
yes,
he's the chaplain, right? If you've ever been to a hospital with a loved one, if they were admitted for more than 24 hours, chances are they had something like on a clipboard, do you want to visit from the chaplain? And if you say yes, if it's a big hospital, you can pick your preference, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish. In New York City, you get the choice of Jewish. The rest of the country, you might not have that choice. But that's the experience a lot of people have with hospital chaplains. And I actually had that experience myself some years ago. I have, for viewers who are watching, you can barely see the scar because I had a great surgeon. But I wrecked my elbow 6, 7, 8 years ago, before the hospice chaplaincy began. But I had the experience of being hospitalized for 3 or 4 days while I waited a major surgery on my arm. It was not life-threatening, but it was horrible. Let me put it out there that for anyone who's been hospitalized, and all of your listeners, if they're of a certain age, chances are they've had at least 1 or 2 visits to the hospital. Yeah. You know it, right? It is horrible, whether you're in there for a heart attack or a heart procedure or cancer or even something, quote, as not that bad as a wrecked elbow, to spend the night in an uncomfortable bed away from your loved ones. If you're dealing with surgery, which is inherently frightening to most people, more so if you have anxiety about medical procedures, your guest is pointing to himself, like, it's difficult to be hospitalized.
Yeah.
I had 2 different wonderful chaplains. This was at New York Presbyterian in Upper Manhattan, both Jewish chaplains, because I had checked that box. And one of them named my pain. She heard all of this stuff, and she heard me minimizing, at least I didn't get killed like Sonny Bono when he had a ski accident, and it's only my elbow. And she said, but Ben, you also told me that you're going to be out of work for a few months, and you told me that you're frightened, and you told me you're in pain, and you told me you're facing disability, the loss of use of your arm for several months. She's like, that's a lot of loss right there, Ben. That's a lot of hurt. Yeah. And that was classic chaplain skill, to hear the person's story and then acknowledge their pain. The other guy was a little more traditional, did some songs and psalms with me, and that was also moving, like to have someone pray with me. But that thing that first chaplain did is what Rabbi David needs to learn in his journey. Instead of offering teachings or sermons, to invite questions and storytelling from the person in the bed. We call it in chaplain training making space or making sacred space. So you actually pull back a little bit. I'm doing it on camera for all of you viewers. And you give the person in the bed or the person who's sitting in a chair who's crying space to have that feeling. As my wonderful trainer, Rabbi Jim Michaels, used to say, you need to go down to the basement with them. And that can be spooky. That can be dark. Returning to your original question, hospice, is that intense? Sure, because the basement for people who are dying is to sit with them during their dying days, or to sit with their loved ones after they have just died, or during those moments when they leave this plane and enter another. That is admittedly emotionally intense, and that's part of the drama of our young hero, Rabbi David's journey and training. But that dramatizes something that we all need to go through in our lives, right? Our own mortality, our own particular and individual journeys of grief, as we deal with the passing of the generations. Right. People sometimes are surprised. They're like, oh, Ben, you're so young. Why are you writing a musical about death and dying? That's so dark. It's like, well, when I was in elementary school, I went to my first funeral when my grandma died. In middle school, I went to the second funeral when my grandpa died. In college, I lost my first friend. It was a beloved boss who dropped dead of a heart attack. And in my 20s, my first college friend, as in first peer, died, sadly, by suicide. In my 30s, I lost a friend who had muscular dystrophy, and he had outlived his life expectancy. So none of those losses wrecked me. They were all difficult. Thank God my parents are still alive and well, as are my wife's parents, but there will be a time when we have to bury all 4 of them. Yeah. And at a certain point, I will have to bury my spouse, or she will bury me. If God willing, we're still married when we are old and gray. So wherever we are, whatever age and stage we're in, we are all approaching that difficult thing known as our own mortality, our own death, our end of life. And that is super hard, but it's also important to just accept it, maybe laugh about it a little bit, and maybe that's part of my educational mission. I know you guys have yours about kind of enlightened, healthy aging. I think acknowledging mortality, which is admittedly the finish line, so to speak, for this race called life, acknowledging that is an ending, I think is healthy. And that's part of what the different people in the play all go through, whether they're in the bed, whether the plus one, the loved one, holding hands with the person in the bed, or this guy, the chaplain, watching it all unfold.
And it's such a hard, I mean, it's just such a hard topic to discuss, for all of those, for the reasons of, you don't want to address your own mortality. You don't want to know about the people, whoever you're addressing. You don't want their mortality to be in question. I mean, it's going to happen. So why not sing about it? You know?
Absolutely. And you're nodding, and the two of you, I think, based on your profession, podcasters, you have these conversations probably more than many of your peers. But I am guessing that I'm not rude enough to ask how old you are, but I'm guessing some of your peers still have both parents alive, and many have already lost one or two.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to speak for
It's
her,
there.
but I will say that, at my age, we the last couple years it started to lose a lot more people who I went to school with, which it can be a very rude awakening that it's gotten to be fairly constant. But I'm lucky enough both of my parents are still living. Terry's one of her mother's still living, so yeah. But I was going to say I'm kind of like you, that I was brought up going to funerals. My parents took us, and they didn't. There was nothing weird. They don't. They. I don't know. They don't make you like go up and touch them or view them or whatever. But you were just there, surrounded. That that this is part of life. It doesn't make it any easier, but there is. I have seen people that they didn't go to their first funeral till they were in their 20s or 30s, and it was a very difficult experience. But it's just part of life. I haven't met anybody yet that's been able to beat it and, avoid it. So it's coming. It's not a pleasant thing. But the other thing that ties into this story, or ties into our educational, is, having these conversations and not waiting until it's too late to ask these questions. And I like what you were talking about, get them to tell their story, because we encourage that as family members. We should be just this morning we did a taping, and we were just saying you're never too young to start that conversation. Like my parents, like, what were your grandparents like? Something I've never asked. I knew a couple of them very little, when I was small they were alive. But anyway, and so having these conversations about who they are. The other thing I like that you talk about is, as the chaplain, you getting to know the person, because so many times as healthcare workers that deal with the aging, the person becomes the affliction. It's just, oh, that person that's got, heart failure in room 3 or whatever. And it's like, no, this person was they are somebody. They had a life, they had a career, family, they had all this stuff. But, and I had a nursing home resident tell me once that, I've been reduced to the lady that's incontinent in room 3. So I think letting people talk about that it's really, really good.
I love that last story. In the field of education, we talk a lot about people first language. It's important, for instance, if you have a child with special needs, you don't say that's a special ed kid. Yeah. You say it's a child with special learning needs.
Right.
It takes a few more syllables, but the point is that the child is not defined by his or her learning disability.
Right.
Similarly, if someone is elderly and they, it's nicer and I think more respectful to say this is an older adult or just an adult.
Right.
Like if their age is important, we can mention it. We don't have to hide it. But if it's just he's an old man, she's an old lady, and the age is the defining and limiting characteristic, that's not so nice. Similarly with disease, yes, all of us are carrying some sort of affliction. Even if you are in, quote, perfect health, you're still busy dying. It's part of the natural attrition or, atrophy of living organisms. Book plug, Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. Amazing book. And one of the things that he teaches is that all living things are born, they grow, they live, and they die. Similar wisdom in the Robert Fulghum classic, All I Needed to Know, I Learned in Kindergarten, where he talks about how 5-year-olds know, because they've planted a seed in kindergarten class, that the seed, if cared for, will grow, and get tall, and then at a certain point it'll fall over and then it will die.
Yeah.
So 5-year-olds can handle that lesson of mortality. Something happens as we approach the peak of our prime, our 20s, 30s, 40s, etc., where we're like super invincible and young and sexy and strong. And at that point, we can't even fathom death and dying. It's why one of my characters early in the play who dies, a younger man, it's like particularly heartbreaking because he's not supposed to be dying. When the older people die, maybe there's a different intensity of heartbreak because it's like life expectancy and so forth. But it's that ending, to quote my song, it's coming for all of us.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm not sure, Roy, if you want me to begin with something lively and funny or something inspirational. What are you feeling right here? Because if it's everyone dies, I've got a good one.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Let's do that.
So,
Yeah.
This is the opening number from the play. It's called Spoiler Alert. I wrote the lyrics, music by Andy Bosov. This is a sort of classic Broadway comedy number, and we wrote it. The concept came from my buddy Jason Spiewak, who's one of the other composers. We were sitting around brainstorming, and he said, yeah, man, people are going to be stressed. They're going to be nervous about this play, about all the dying. He's like, we need a good comedy number to break the ice. And so we're brainstorming, and he's like, I know, everybody dies. And I said, everybody dies in the end. He's like, that's the hook.
Yeah.
So that's the punchline. I already ruined it. The song is called Spoiler Alert.
Okay.
And I hope you enjoy it. We don't mean to be a bummer, but we've got some awful news. It gets colder after summer, and even winners lose. Robert Frost composed on one fine day in a most poetic way. He wrote, nothing gold can stay. That's what he said, and now he's dead because, spoiler alert, everybody dies in the end. Sorry to ruin the play, my friend. Love 'em or hate 'em, this cannot bend. Everybody dies in the end. We all go when we gotta go. You hear every single person you know, my dear. The neighborly Ned who you just despise. Your trustworthy friend, the guy who lies. Holy sister never sinned in her life. Your father, your mother, your husband or wife. The hero and the villain of each tall tale. The sailor who battled a full force gale. Spoiler alert. Everybody dies in the end. There we go. Sorry to ruin the play, my friend. Love 'em or hate 'em, this cannot bend. Everybody dies in the end. It's the truth, Ruth. It's sad, Vlad, it ain't pretty, Kitty, but it's real, Camille. It's coming for all of us. No matter how you feel, no matter your name or party or game, it's the same, it's the same. The man who's gentle and noble and smart, the lady who woke the world with her art, the boy who lived with a baboon heart. They all leave the stage when they're done with their part. Our curtain is up, we will do our thing. We hope you don't cry every time we sing. Whether you're married or you got no ring, the lowliest pauper, the loftiest king, we all gotta die. We all gotta die. Just sing, just sing. Just sing, just sing. Everybody dies in the end. Sorry to ruin the play, my friend. Love 'em or hate 'em, this cannot bend. Everybody dies in the end. Everybody dies in the end.
Awesome. Yeah, that was great.
So great. I loved that.
Thank
Well,
you. By the way, there is a kick line in the final verse.
I
but
could tell. I was doing it.
Jazz hands.
Well, so is that the, I guess this is the shortest play ever. We open, sing the song, It's over. Drop the curtain. It's
Drop the mic.
Well, so that is when presented IRL in real life, as the kids say. That is an ensemble number. The rabbi character is the sort of main narrator doing most of that, but it is written as an ensemble number with all the characters doing a few punchlines.
Awesome.
And that way we can get a group kick line, because you don't know who it is. Yeah. And through the magic of theater, all of our elderly and seriously ill patients can sing beautifully and dance. That's part of the fun of suspending disbelief.
Right.
And we get to do that again and again. I tell folks it's like a cross between Fiddler on the Roof and a chorus line. Fiddler on the Roof because it's very Jewish, a lot of talking to God and that sort of dialectical, as we say, and chorus line because you hear these songs that are almost like monologues set to music.
Right.
You have Stella, who remembers skiing in the mountains with her kids and dreams of snow as she's fading away. You have Leroy, a former church musician, who remembers the pride of using his body to make music, to protest, to stand up for what was right. And we have Murray, who, as he faces his death, he just wants to make friends. He's like that guy who's friendly with everyone. And he has kind of a up-tempo Frank Sinatra kind of song called My Last Day on Earth. And he's like, I'll make a new friend. So everyone faces their ending in different ways. And that's the way it's a little bit like chorus line. But I invite all of the listeners and viewers to think about who do you think you might be in hospice care or in end-of-life care? We'll imagine the Broadway version of the scene, right? Because realistically, a lot of folks who die are not dancing and singing and cracking jokes the way my characters are. But do you imagine you might be someone who's making new friends as you're hospitalized or in a hospice? Do you imagine you're someone who would be prayerful and having a serene experience full of gratitude like Leroy? Do you think you might be dealing with fear or regret like Stella? Do you think you might be wrestling with God and a little angry about losses like our rabbi character goes through? Those are all, emotions that are part of a very big range of intense emotions that we experience as we deal with mortality. You were spot on before, Roy, when you asked, chaplaincy, that's, chaplaincy in hospice, that's intense. So the question behind the question is like, how do you deal with all that dying? That's kind of one of the first big questions our young hero asks. Yeah. He's like, I'm ready for this job, except all the dying. And it's like, oops. But the reassuring thing comes from the nurse, his soon-to-be friend, Nurse Marie, who teaches the philosophy of hospice and says that, the joke is, yeah, it's a hospice, lots of dying, ain't no avoiding that, but dying's not so bad. Lots of people die here. They turn out fine. And, Rabbi, I just hope when I die, I get treated this nice. And honestly, when I think about my experiences working as a chaplain at this hospice, the real one that inspired the musical and the mythical one on stage, it brings a smile to my face. People are surprised that I can laugh and joke about hospice, that I have happy memories there. It's because we bring these amazing stories up. We create moments of family unity, sometimes reconciliation, sometimes not. But unfortunately, hospitals are not typically designed for moments of home-like connection. There's some hospitals that have been tweaking around the edges, but let's be realistic. Hospitals are not designed to be home-like environments. No. Perhaps nursing homes try to bridge that gap between a home-like environment and medicalization. But if you think about the person who dies in a hospital with all kinds of tubes and beeps, to most people that doesn't feel all that home-like, doesn't feel all that natural. It's often very upsetting visually. It often doesn't smell nice or sound nice. Hospice care is not a panacea. It's not actually for everyone, because you need to qualify in certain kinds of ways, as in seriously ill, not likely to recover in 6 months or fewer, then you can talk with 2 doctors to qualify you for hospice care. But if you elect for that for you and your family, or please have this conversation today with your loved one, right, guys?
Yes.
Talk about your final wishes. Talk about the plan of care and who is your power of attorney if, God forbid, you and your spouse were to get hurt or sick at the same time. You know, those are conversations to have today, not in the hospital, folks.
Right.
Not fighting inside a hospice, folks.
Yeah.
So that's one of my teaching moments for you. Please
PSA.
have that conversation now. But if you don't, the important decisions will be made by people who might not be able to ask you a question. You know, God forbid, whoever's listening, if you were incapacitated tomorrow, some jerk on the road does something dangerous and bumps into your car. If you're hospitalized tomorrow, do your loved ones know your wishes? If the answer is no, I lovingly encourage you to seek out resources. I know Roy and Terry do a great job of educating all the listeners. Have that conversation with your loved one about, your end-of-life wishes. I have a will, even though I'm 40. If you're 40 or 50 or 60 or 30 or 20, you should have a will. The only reason you shouldn't have a will, maybe if you're less than 18 and you only have like $100 and some bubble gum or something. The kids have bubble gum. No, but seriously, anyone who's a legal adult should have a will, and they should have advanced directives that deal with medical care.
Right.
I've seen up close and personal, and it's horrible when loved ones are fighting over care because they don't know. Anyway, stepping off of soapbox.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right about that, because every, siblings all think that they know what mom or dad wanted, and the reality is, a lot of times nobody's ever talked to mom and dad. So thank you for that PSA.
Sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of talking about that.
Yeah. But I think the other thing that's kind of curious about this, about the play and hospice is, hospice was designed is we're never going to enjoy dying, and I get that, but hospice was designed to make end of life more pleasurable, to say, no more, as much as we can, no more tubes, no more fighting, no more, whatever these treatments and all. It's a place just to make the individual comfortable and to live out their life as best as possible, with them and the family surrounding. So I think it's interesting that, you do bring these stories to life, and, we add a little humor to it. So I think that actually fits in very well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, since we're talking for a little bit about what hospice is, if there's a song that could be like cut and put into like a PSA for why do hospice, it's this one. It's called Live Until You Die.
Okay.
And it's inspired by some of the writings of Dame Cicely Saunders. She was the British nurse who in England started what we now think of as the modern hospice movement. And this was after World War II, when, based on medical advances, a lot of things that previously would kill soldiers, they were surviving them. So now there was this new medical problem of end of life that was prolonged. It's kind of a funny thing when we think about it, but it is a modern miracle that it takes so long to die. In olden times, when life expectancy was shorter, if you were a young man and you were, let me take a grisly example. Civil War, if you were shot in the leg, there was a good chance you would die because you would get gangrene and the infection would spread. And not to be gross for all the listeners, but like a lot of things are now like, you would just get a field dressing and then medevaced, and a helicopter would take you away. Like, there are all kinds of reasons why soldiers and now the general public live longer. And that's the short version of how hospice started. Look up on Wikipedia if you want to know more. So I did some reading on Cicely Saunders and her philosophy behind hospice care. Okay. And I wrote this song. It's called Live Until You Die. I wrote the words, and the music is by Jason Spiewak. Okay. I'll do a portion of it.
Okay.
This is performed by the nurse. I will do all I can and share the moments you lived. Laugh with you and cry till the moment you die, and die in peace. Even when you're dying, you are holy. Even when you're broken, you are whole. I will walk with you as you're on your way. I will talk with you so you have your say. Sitting by your side until the final day. I am here for you, so live until you die. Live until you die.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's
Thanks for
beautiful.
performing that. We appreciate that. So, just a minute. I know that you got this written, wrapping it all up, and then the pandemic hit, and so yeah,
Miss
So-
heaven.
yeah. So I know that you've performed this for some virtual audiences and probably for some local audiences there close to you. So what has the reception been like from old and young?
Thanks for asking, Roy, and acknowledging my particular grief
Yes.
of this project.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Though it's not dead. Virtual Tour 2021, including an appearance on Educational Podcast.
That's
with
right.
Roy Parker and Terry Malazzi. Thank you. Did I say it wrong? Malozzi?
Malazzi. Malazzi.
Malazzi. Okay, Kintisch. Right. One of us are Italian. Anyway, yes, being on this podcast is part of the Virtual Tour 2021. And yes, we are all virtual right now because of the dastardly coronavirus. However, there is hope. I've got 2 shots in my arm, and I do hope, as a public school teacher, I got to jump to the front of the line. And it seems like my target audience is 50 plus, so a lot of them have shots.
Right.
But even before we do the in-person live theater, and all joking aside, I will not do any live performances until I am convinced, along with my creative team, that it is safe to do theater inside. But there are a lot of exciting opportunities right now for live theater and live music in this virtual environment.
Right.
So yes, Roy, I have done some live appearances. The main, I guess you could call it product or performance that we, the Life Review team, are bringing to the world right now is called Life Review Stories and Songs. It is a virtual cabaret that has 8 songs as well as narration and stories in between. It's a nice, tight, entertaining 45 minutes with a 15-minute Q&A to follow.
Oh,
I've
nice.
presented that to a large synagogue as well as one of the biggest eldercare facilities in the Baltimore, Washington region. That was an interesting gig because they had it piped through you know how a lot of eldercare facilities, they have like their cable channel for announcements and stuff?
Right.
So there was my face on hundreds of TVs, so that's exciting. For people who can't get out of their institution at all, let alone go to live theater.
Right.
For the synagogue performance and for other sort of cultural institutions, happy to do that show. And then for an additional fee, we can add an educational segment to follow. Sort of like a brief musical lecture where we look closely at some of the songs. I can distribute copies of lyrics and we sort of pull apart the meaning because there's a lot of juicy material in it. I have a program to talk about grief and loss, to talk about end-of-life care. We have one about faith issues for end-of-life care, one about family and generational issues, and then one about caring for the caregivers. I'm doing a presentation at a chaplaincy conference in a month, the same chaplaincy program where I did my final unit, so like the circle is completed. It's a real honor. Shout out to Jeff Teo out in Arizona. But I'll be presenting this musical and then doing some discussions with the next generation of chaplains, because
that's awesome.
we need to, as care providers, and you alluded to this earlier, we need to get comfortable with our own mortality.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to laugh a little bit about some of the things that are funny, whether it's mortality or in the play I've got this bawdy number about sex and lusting after the care staff, which is a thing, male or female. You know, the sex drive is alive and kicking, whether or not we can do anything about it until our death. So that's just sort of a funny PG-13 song that's in there. But anyway, back to the tour. We are hoping to bring this in this cabaret virtual format for as many audiences as we can. I know I'm performing at my boyhood synagogue later in June. I'm hoping to make some conference appearances. So I encourage all of the listeners, if you've enjoyed this interview and some of the songs, please do check out lifereviewmusical.com, and you can submit your information to get in touch with me. I'd love to meet you and hear about you and your organization or your community. And through the power of the internet, as long as you have the internet connection, I can come to you.
Right.
Now, the exciting thing, there's this metaphor in the play. If you visit the musical website, you'll see our logo is a daffodil. So in the opening scene, the young chaplain is planting bulbs, and he reveals that those are in memory. He's planting flowers in memory of his deceased parents.
Okay.
He's a young man, but sadly he's lost both his parents. At the end of the play, 6 months later, it's spring, and the daffodils are blooming. So I look out my window. I don't know, are the daffodils still blooming down in Texas? But in Maryland, the daffodils are still up. They're starting to fade a little, but I see that sign of hope and renewal. What does this have to do with the tour? Well, I'm happy to report that at least one synagogue I pitched on the virtual show, they were like, it sounds too heavy for virtual, but how about we book you in a year for a live show? And I said, yes.
No.
So if you want to talk to me about a live show in 2022 or 2023, calendar's wide open. But I think that what's likely to happen is I'm going to be performing all over the country in this virtual environment, and it's like planting bulbs.
Right.
And who knows which might grow into a future in real life performance, which might just touch someone who's inspired to learn more, perhaps to support the project. We are still in early development, but we have big dreams. So if this conversation today inspired you or moved you, if you like the music, please learn more. I would be delighted to meet you personally and have a conversation. Yeah. Oh, also Instagram at Life Review Musical. That's how I found Roy and Terry.
So what has the reception been from, I know you haven't done a lot.
Real life audiences. I did two real workshops. One with 100 people, one with about 250.
Yeah.
So I've had some audiences. The good news, Roy, is they usually laugh when they're supposed to. Sometimes they laugh at unexpected places, which is a funny thing about writing comedy. You never know, like, if there's an unexpected punchline.
Right.
And then they definitely cry when they're supposed to, too. My wife teases me when I say, like, oh, man, they were all crying. She's like, are you happy about that? And I say, well, it's like, when you're a songwriter, if you can create a song that moves people to tears, you've created something of power. It's actually it makes me remember the first time I shared one of my songs in public. It was that song about snow, that very first song I wrote. The melody was not even done yet, so I was sort of making up the melody on the spot. The words were like 75% done. Yeah. But I had a venue. It was a songwriter's share at a Jewish education conference. Shout out to my dear friend Sue Horowitz, who led that workshop. And I sang for about 20 people in a room. It was a cappella. It was rather clumsy, but the words were meaningful to people. And I'd say 15 or so people, men and women alike, were crying openly when the song was done. And I said to myself, oh, wow, I've created something impactful here. And right after the class ended, Sue came up to me and she said, Ben, are there more songs? And I said, there are. And she said, you need to keep working on this. You've got an important project here.
Oh, that's
she gave me
awesome.
one piece of advice. She said, clearly you know how to write a sad song, so you have to write some comedy songs and some romance songs and some shocking songs, because if you write 8 sad ballads, before intermission, they won't return for the second half. They'll just be like, next.
Be hitting too much.
And so I've tried to follow that advice. You heard one of the comedy songs before. There are a few others. And I try to have a variety of musical styles. There's a gospel song, an R&B song, several sort of 80s sounding power ballads, because that's what Michael Miller and Jason Spiewak seem to write. They're both like deep
Nice.
in the Carole King, Billy Joel, Elton John sound. So
There
love
you
it.
go.
like those guys.
Yeah.
They're not
Speaking our
officially part of
language.
my creative team, but you can hear echoes from all three wonderful piano-heavy rockers that I just mentioned, or songwriters I mentioned. You know, it's been wonderful. I mean, I'm joking but not joking about the laughing and the crying, and here's why, Roy. There's a reason why there's this whole genre called gallows humor. Why is everyone making jokes around the gallows? Someone's gonna die. It's because it's a very uncomfortable situation. And I'm not even gonna get on my soapbox about capital punishment. By the way, I'm against it.
Yeah.
That said, being in a place where death is like so imminent is deeply uncomfortable, and that's why people want to joke, because it like diffuses the tension. It's why I had to make a comedy number to kick off my musical about hospice. It's why the character Rabbi David, the character who I play, he's got that sort of nebbishy, nervous, self-deprecating persona that's a little Woody Allen, it's a little Tevye from Fiddler. But it is a classic Jewish trope to make jokes in the face of deep pain and suffering. There's a whole somewhat uncomfortable subgenre of Jewish humor about the Holocaust. Some people don't like it, but it's, you know, I wouldn't recommend non-Jews repeat those jokes, but Jews are allowed to, you know, it's like insider humor.
Yeah.
But we all have our uncomfortable stuff. It's also why a lot of people like to joke about sex and joke about drugs and joke about politics. It's all these taboo subjects. Somehow we haven't learned how to have adult conversations around the uncomfortable, but many of us are okay with laughing about it. So I try to use that to our benefit. And, you know, that's why the two of you, I think, were laughing quite a bit during that funny song before. The lyrics are clever, but, like, what is the essential truth? It's not that funny. Everyone dies.
Right.
But if I go up to a lecture and I say, everybody dies, whether you're rich or poor, man, woman, or child, you've already fallen asleep. That's so boring and it's kind of depressing. But a little jazz hands, a little comedy, and then it's like a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down.
Yeah.
To quote another good musical. Not my lyric there.
So besides Rabbi David, we're going to have to scratch him for a moment. Who is your favorite character that you've created?
Oh, that's an easy one. Great question, and I have an answer for you.
I
Leroy
knew you would.
Washington. So he is probably the patient who gets the most airtime. He is the one who forms a deep and sweet connection with the rabbi. His backstory is inspired by a real life person. People always ask me, like, are these real people? And I say the stories are true. The details are changed to protect anonymity.
Yeah.
But anyone who was with me at Center for Hope Hospice would immediately know who this character was based upon. So a real life gentleman who, I'll just say, like, Leroy is based upon a man who grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, historically African-American neighborhood in the most populous borough of the nation's largest city. He and I connected in real life over that common experience in Bed-Stuy, and we actually have a funny dialogue moment where he says, I grew up in Bed-Stuy, and I say, I used to live in Bed-Stuy, and he said, another young white guy who lives in Bed-Stuy. And we have like this laugh about gentrification, but it's true. When I lived in Brooklyn, I was that white guy in Bed-Stuy. Anyway, the man who Leroy was based upon, and the Leroy character as well, he played church organ in a big black church. The real life person, he told me that he played for over 50 years.
Wow.
So he started as a teenager. He took his first piano lesson when he was 11, and he first took over the junior choir in his neighborhood black church when he was 15. And he first played the
Man.
big service when he was 19. And then he played all the way until his 60s. And then sadly, he suffered a stroke late in life where he lost the use of one hand. I don't include all of those biographical details in fictionalized version of that person named Leroy, but he was a retired church musician. And his song, the gospel song, is all about being thankful for the body that he had. I imagine this might be one of those spots where even our non-hospice people can relate. So if any of your listeners happen to be older than they used to be, listen up. I'm guessing, whatever age you are, if you're youngish 40 like me or freakishly young, less than 40, what are you doing on this podcast? No, just kidding. We love our young listeners. But if you're 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 or, wow, you're 90 or holy moly, you're 100 plus, I didn't know 100-year-olds could listen to podcasts. Whatever age you are, I'm guessing there's something in your body that isn't working as it used to. Just as someone who's worked with some aging people of different ages, I'm just going to put that out there. I can say as a 40-year-old, my body hurts in ways it didn't when I was 20, and I present as a young man. I've worked with a lot of geriatric patients who are 60, 70, 80, 90. It's part of aging, even when you're decades, God willing, from the grave, that our body changes and our body evolves. And I'm guessing if you've spoken to doctors and social workers, this is a big theme, what I call the betrayal of the body. Especially if you're lucky enough to be cognitively with it, as Leroy was, or the real life Leroy was. He had a lot of joy and a lot of stories, and he could crack jokes, and he could tease me about my inept guitar playing, and we had so much fun together in real life. And I think the fictionalized version of that character also reflects that love and that friendship. His song, though, is meant to highlight that we can hold in tension at the same time the pain of that betrayal of the body. In his case, the loss of one hand, so he couldn't make music. In my case, I'm 40, but I can't play rugby anymore because I had too many concussions and my back hurts. Maybe if you're 60, there's changes with who lives at home with you anymore. Maybe you've switched from golf to tennis, or tennis to pickleball, or pickleball to Wii bowling, depending on how your body is, right? Yeah. But like, that's part of the aging process. So Leroy, in his song, he is sort of like raising up, as faithful people say, he raises up the holiness. With these hands, I played for the Lord. With these hands, I prayed with a chord. That couplet sort of highlights the holy experience it was of using his body to make music for God. And then on subsequent verses, he stands up for what's right. He marches for justice and so forth. So when our bodies break down, whatever age and stage we're at, there's this aspect of grief about we can't do the thing we used to. So I mentioned rugby, and that's a great 40-year-old's lament. Oh, I can't play rugby. Cry me a rigber. Cry me a river.
A rigber.
But, cry me a rigber. There we go. There's my senior moment. But I'll tell you, when I hung up my cleats, it was a real loss because I played for 10 years and I loved it. This is not the right podcast for it, but I'll tell you, it was an amazing experience. And for me, that's like the quintessential youthful Ben. I'm sure all of your listeners, you have something, right? Whether it was the time when your love life was hot and heavy, or you were a great athlete, or you thought you looked better than you ever did, or you were making most money, or whatever is like your youthful power moment. Eventually you age past that, and then you kind of have this nostalgia for what that was to you. I try to acknowledge that throughout the play in a playful way. So when we talk about sex, when we talk about work, when we talk about travel, like those are things that kind of evolve as we age, and that is difficult, but it is real. Now, why is Leroy such a great character in the play? He is the one who is, yes, wise enough to help the rabbi get better at his craft. He also can match wits with him. They play this game where, you know how a lot of Christians are really good at quoting the Bible line and verse? Jews are not that good at it. Fun fact, even clergy. So some Jews are good at quoting line and verse, but none of them are as good as their Christian brothers and sisters. It's just like something Christians are good at, and also Muslims. But so Leroy figures that out, and he's like, blah, 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 da, da, da. And the rabbi is like, and he turns around, and Leroy's like, what are you doing fiddling with your phone? And he's like, Rabbi Google. And,
That's awesome.
it's a dumb joke, but it killed in the audience. The thing that he has, though, that he brings to him, it's friendship. It's perhaps a surrogate father or grandfather figure. That's not made totally clear, but we do come to learn that young Rabbi David is missing the older generation.
Yeah.
And, we all have those older people in our life who, after they die, let's be honest, they are often mythologized in a kind of way. I feel that way about my grandfather of blessed memory. So I'll tell you, Grandpa Bernie, my father's father, was a man who I only knew until I was 12, because that's when he passed. But he was so beloved. He was a postal worker in New York City back before UPS. So the guys, they also did the parcel post, right? So he knew everyone in a 4 square mile part of Rockaway. And so he knew hundreds of people, and he knew when their birthdays were because then the gifts arrived, and he knew about their births and marriages and divorces because he brought them the stuff. So I think about him, and I know he was a complicated man, but like for me, Grandpa Bernie, the myth is just friend to the world and sweet, gentle soul. So I think I might have written some aspects of Grandpa Bernie into Leroy. I'm actually making this insight live on camera with you two. I've never made that connection before, but I think writers, playwrights, songwriters, we always try to borrow from our life without stealing. Yeah. So the title, Will It Still Snow When I'm Gone, is actually borrowed from a poem with permission by my mother-in-law. Her poem had to do with a woman imagining life after death in New England. So I just sort of took the conceit of the poem and wrote it into a big ballad. For Leroy, I just imagined it had to be a gospel song because he was accompanying gospel his whole life. Which actually brings me to maybe the last musical offering. At the end of the play, I'm not going to tell the whole story. You can get a little bit of a synopsis on the website, I think, or just book me, right?
Book him.
Yes, but I will tell you this. As spoiler alert indicated earlier, yes, many of our characters die, because that's what happens in hospice care.
Right.
So the most dramatic, sad, difficult moment of the play is probably Leroy's death, and we see it in front of us. And I will give you a tiny introduction and serenade you and your listeners.
Okay. Awesome.
So Rabbi David is getting ready. I'll just read the little intro. It's late in the day, and it's late in the play. And before Rabbi David heads to his car to drive home, he pops into Leroy's room for a quick visit. They talk together, quieter than usual. And after a few playful pleasantries, Leroy says, "Rabbi, I'm feeling tired." Rabbi David offers to play him a lullaby to help him fall asleep. Leroy nods weakly and smiles in the most subtle of ways. Rabbi David sits near the bed and plays the following song. Lay on back, rest your head, lay thee down, safe in bed. Close your eyes, darling dear, we drift away. I'll stay right here. Time to sing a lullaby. Sing a soft, sincere goodbye. Tuck you in for a dream so sweet. Heaven awaits. Your life's complete. your tear, kiss your face, soothe your fear. You are holy, your life's been blessed. Now my love, it's time to rest. Time to sing a lullaby. Sing a soft, sincere goodbye. Tuck you in for a dream so sweet. Heaven awaits, your life's complete. So rest, rest in peace. Rest, rest in peace. Rest, rest in peace. Rest, rest in peace.
Wow, that was beautiful, Ben.
Oh my gosh, that's twice you've gotten me.
Yeah.
That's two. You get one more.
I made you cry 2 times, Terry.
Yes. How dare you? It was
Well,
beautiful.
I'm glad you found it beautiful. Can you tell me and the listeners, Terry, what was it about that song just now that brought tears to your eyes?
Heaven waits for you. I mean, just it was just all of the emotions together, and then the word, just all of it, everything. It was beautiful. It was. I just imagined myself.
I think it's that calming, sometimes it's like we fight that death until, we had actually had a guest this morning that her mother waited till everybody got around, and then, she was passed easily. But I think a lot of times people, it seem like they fight that till the very end. And, this is kind of like a message that, it's okay.
Like, you still have stuff to do, but
just not here.
really not here.
Yeah, that's interesting, that the phrase that you said just now, Roy. It's okay.
Yeah.
I've experienced this many times in my travels as a hospice chaplain, both as a trainee, and then more recently, my final unit of training was in a sort of what I call a circuit hospice here in Maryland. Shout out to JISA Hospice, Jewish Social Service Agency Hospice Care. So I traveled 1 day a week for a year. In addition to my job as a cantor, I was a hospice chaplain, 1 day a week. And I would be here and there, usually 4 or 5 visits per day on the day that I worked. And sometimes I would see someone who was kind of holding on. Sometimes I'd see someone who was quickly fading away. But it is an experience we've seen time and again, Roy and Terry, that the person in the bed is hanging on for someone outside of the bed.
Oh.
And it's very important for the person who they're waiting on, or their loved one, or the person who they hope visits. Can he make it to the bed? And I'm not like making fun here. This is a very real human drama I've seen play out dozens of times, where grandpa is waiting for the grandson to call or Skype, and then once that happens, he feels like he can let go.
Right.
Or sometimes everyone gathers vigil style all day. Everyone thinks the person's going to go. They don't. Then they return to the hotel room and the person dies in the night. That is very, very common. It's as if the person, even if they're like non-communicative, a lot of times it seems that seriously ill and dying patients, they kind of know when the loved ones are nearby, and they kind of know when they're not. And this is fascinating because you can't interview the deceased person after they die.
Right.
Did you die on purpose in the night after your loved ones left?
Yeah.
But all joking aside, like, that is a very common occurrence, I believe, because the person, whether they're like cognizant of it on the surface level, or if it's some metaphysical thing. I am not an expert on death and dying, but I've been around it enough to say that people often wait for a release.
Right.
They wait for permission. I've heard a million stories, and I'm guessing you have from your various guests, where someone will say, "Mom, it's okay to go." And I would encourage your listeners, if anyone listening today has a loved one who is in hospice care or who is in the hospital sort of fighting what we call a battle of diminishing returns, I might lovingly suggest that you have a conversation, if you haven't already, where you tell them how much you love them and give them permission. Oh. Say, I love you, and if you need to go, Mom, if you need to go, Dad, it's okay. Because a lot of times people hang on beyond when they need to, beyond when they're comfortable, because they think they need to for the person outside of the bed. This was actually something I did as a chaplain too, is I would counsel the loved ones who were struggling with anticipatory grief. Oh my God, my mom is dying. Help me, Cantor. And I would sit with them in the waiting room or the coffee area and we'd talk it over. But I would always encourage them, as I'm encouraging your listeners and viewers, like, you're doing the right thing to be here now. You don't have to move in. You know, you got to go home and shower. Right. I had that conversation with a few people who were doing vigil for like days and days and weeks. You got to shower, you got to rest. Can't move into the hospice along with your dying loved one. But being there, if you can, is great. And I might also, we were talking earlier about the virtual tour, Terry and Roy. I would say that one of the silver linings for this terrible corona plague is all of us have become a lot more facile in this medium, right?
Right.
We've gotten better at working the camera and working the audio. And what does that mean? It means we don't really have an excuse not to visit our elderly grandpa, grandma, mother, father, loved one, whether they're seriously ill and dying or they're just like a lonely old person in a nursing home. You have no excuse. Now, I'm not trying to guilt all of your listeners, but to remind them that, look, I have like a crappy old iPhone, but with the power of FaceTime, boop, look, there I am.
Right.
Some of the most moving stories of chaplaincy I heard, especially in the early pandemic, Roy, when New York City was being ravaged. I remember this was the first time I cried for the pandemic. I read this very moving story about chaplains at one of New York's biggest hospitals. If your listeners remember, nearly a year ago in April, it was when it crested in New York City. Mm-hmm. And we all realized as a nation, like, holy crap, this is dangerous, especially in the cities, especially among our older and vulnerable. So there was a story of chaplains being so overwhelmed with the quantity of death and the fact that they couldn't hold hands anymore.
Yeah. They
couldn't embrace with arms and proximity the loved ones. Well, what became their saving grace? It's not as good as holding hands and being there, but I've read stories, perhaps your viewers or listeners have heard too, about chaplains being sort of like tech assistants. So they're like facilitators and certainly social workers and activities directors. Shout out to all of your eldercare people listening.
Oh my gosh. You
guys have all been so creative to try to make that connection via Skype, via Zoom, via FaceTime, all the tech. So I would remind us, God willing, we will all get vaccines soon. We can return to so-called normal life. Let's not forget how we've all learned to make these connections through the computer, through the phone, and so forth. Because I will acknowledge, as I did at the beginning of the interview, Terry, like, it's not easy to visit all the people who are dying. Yeah. It's not easy to visit eldercare facilities, even the fancy ones, like in Rockville and Bethesda that look like hotels. It's still a little depressing. Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. Let's call a spade. But the people there are all individuals with loved ones. And those loved ones, if they visit, they are doing an amazing thing. And if they forget to visit, well, give them a call.
Yeah.
Connect on phone.
Mentioning that, it was a telling picture from that time period is that one of the hospitals had got a bunch of orchestra stands from somebody, and they had all the iPads set up on these stands where they could take them into the residence room. And help them out. So, but it's a good thing, and I don't think we take advantage of that enough. Is that sometimes if we can't be there, being on the virtually there, just being able to see or have somebody see us, it's the next best thing. So we need to figure out how to make that happen.
And there aren't any reasons why now
No.
in this day and age. There aren't any reasons why you shouldn't be able to
And
do
we
it.
can't sell our elders short that we can they can figure out how to do it. Having saying
Yes,
they just can't do it is
absolutely.
really not an excuse. We can figure out a way to make it happen for them. So
Yes, and when safety allows, I also encourage us to put our teenage and 20-something and even elementary school age kids to work as tech assistants with our elders.
Yes.
I happen to be the proud father of a 10-year-old girl who I overhear in virtual school being like tech assistant to
Right.
3 or 4 different professional teachers. It's very funny. But any of you who are at home with your students in virtual school, you may have overheard this conversation too. So if you are lucky enough to have elderly parents who are still alive, if you are not personally fabulous with the tech, maybe the younger generation is. And that's a nice way to bridge the gap. Hey, Grandma, this is how you use FaceTime, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a nice way to make that connection.
That's funny.
Well, Ben, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to be with us. This is such an exciting project. We are excited. Hopefully, we can get the word out, and until you can return to live
live
theater,
stage.
at least this is awesome because for groups with the big screen TVs, or I like what you said about piping it into the residents' TVs. A lot of ways
yes.
to take advantage of this. It's this grieving process. I don't. People always talk about closure. I'm not one that buys into that because I don't think you never forget. It's never closed. You always think about it, but helping us to deal with that grief as we go through the process, but then also those of us that are left after that process as well, that help us deal with our grief where we can, get on with living. That's what the person that passes, that's what they want us to do. They want us to get on with our life and live a good life, but we can still kind of balance that, keeping them in our memory, but yet moving forward as
Right.
well. Yeah.
That's right. They live on in our hearts.
That's right.
They live on in the memories.
Yeah.
And if there's a big message from the play, it's that the stories and songs of our lives live on after we go.
Yeah.
Famous rock stars. I'm also a music teacher by day, so I tell the kids, someone like Michael Jackson or Whitney Houston, they died, but they live on forever through their music.
Yeah.
So that's the power of celebrity. Or
Yeah.
if you're, Humphrey Bogart, you live forever on the silver screen.
Yeah.
But for just regular people, it is about sharing the stories.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to celebrate in Life Review, the Hospice musical.
Yeah.
Who are you? What did you do? Where did you go?
Kind of
Who did
back
you
to our, what we said at the beginning of the show, building on your, your tech segment there, is that with all the tech that's available, the recorders on the iPhones, the video, there's no reason that we can't chronicle, part of our life in writing, our talk to our parents, our grandparents, I think it's good to have it in their words. So if we can capture their audio or even better video of them, think about how your young kids that really don't know them, that will be so beneficial to them at some point in their life. So take a few minutes to figure out how to make that work, chronicle that story for sure.
Or write a musical.
Yeah, or write a music.
Yeah. Oh, please. You can write a musical about a non-hospice subject. I don't want there to happen. My mother-in-law, according to family legend, wrote a great musical at the same time that someone else also did a musical adaptation of The Secret Garden, and the other one made it to Broadway.
Oh, no.
No one else write a hospice musical. I'll be mad at you.
Okay.
However, I would love to hear from you if you've enjoyed the conversation today. And, I just, if I could, I'd love to end with a line of gratitude. We end the play being grateful for the life that we live and for the opportunity to visit and connect.
Yeah.
In the end, I thank you for seeing through the nonsense. In the end, I thank you for being your holy self. In the end, I thank you, my newest best friend. In the end, I thank you for grace at the end. Pray for me, hold my hand. Stand with me while I can stand. Rest is coming soon. I thank you for letting me be in your room. Light of your hopes bright in the gloom. So grateful to have met you. Wonderful you. Wonderful you.
Oh,
that's awesome.
thank you
Well,
so much.
one more time, tell us where they can reach out, get some more information on Life Review, on yourself.
You got it.
Yeah.
Life Review, the Hospice Musical is the name of the project. My name is Ben Kintisch. I wrote the lyrics along with a team of composers, Michael Miller, Jason Spiewak, Andy Bosov. Our website is lifereviewmusical.com, LIFEREVIEWMUSICAL.com. I hope I spelled it right.
MOUSE.
Instagram at Life Review Musical. And we have a form on the website where you can inquire. I will be happy to be in touch. We also have a trailer video that's beautifully made, so you can see some footage from our last live workshop. If you're having trouble picturing it, you can see us with a little bit of jazz hands.
Awesome.
Some audience shots to show that we weren't always in virtual land. And a little bit more about the history of the show. It's kind of an interesting story, 6 years in the making.
Yeah.
And I would be delighted to have you, the listener or the viewer, to be part of our virtual tour 2021. So be in touch.
Okay. That sounds great. Y'all reach out, find out more about it. It's going to be enlightening, and we will definitely, once you get a few live performances under your belt there, we will definitely get you back on. We'd love to talk to you again, see how things are going, keep up with the project.
Yeah, bring me out to Texas.
Yes,
Come
yes,
on.
that's right.
You'll learn how to say y'all properly.
Y'all gonna die in the end.
There you go.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. That's going to do it for another episode of Educational. Of course, I'm Roy.
I'm Terry.
You can find us at educational.com. We're on all the major social media platforms. And, of course, we will put all of Benjamin's information and spell check it, and we will put it in the show notes there as well. So,
That's right. Picture.
Oh.
We're on all the major we're on all the major podcast platforms, iTunes, Stitcher, Google, Spotify. If we're not on one that you listen to, please reach out. And, of course, a video of this interview will go up when the episode goes live. So until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your family.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, everybody.